Perfect. Well, here we are. I'm here with like two very special people who have actually helped to improve my practice. You guys are both with Miracare, and Sarah, you have your own incredible practice. So let me just give people who are listening, a little whiff of what they're, here to sort of explore. Rose, you are the clinical manager at Mira. And Miracare.com is the website for anybody who's listening that wants to hear more information. Go there and check this out. There's going to be something here for people who are trying to conceive, trying to have babies, grow their families, and for the practitioners, midwives, OBGYNs, nurse practitioners, whatever. Rose is the person you're going to speak to, as I did, whenever you're trying to get kind of going with this. And Rose, what's interesting about you is you also have you've also studied and you are a practitioner of, I think the broad term would be fertility awareness education, the
Yes.
Marquette, the Sympto-Thermal Methods. This is all what we talk about with like cervical mucus tracking, basal body temp tracking, and now we have
Mhm.
another tool through Mira to actually also look at what your hormones are doing, the urine metabolites, anyways, alongside some of those other metrics. Did I get that intro
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah, I
good?
think you did a great job. I like to say that we're taking what before was maybe 2D, so like cervical mucus temperature, and now we're adding the third dimension to it. So we're looking at your
Yeah.
same cycle, but just with a much bigger picture and a lot more detail.
I like that. I like that.
Mhm.
And for people out there that really want information, this is definitely a way of getting some more objective means of trying to
Mhm.
figure out what's going on. And we'll talk about some of the specifics here in a second. But first, let's get Sarah Peterson here in the room. Sarah, you have a website, Vera Fertility. Um, that's your practice. You're also a board certified OBGYN. And as we were saying before we recorded, I don't meet too many people like you who are actually like, you went through the same like tremendously hard training that I did, and you still emerged wanting to know more information. And for that, I have a deep respect and gratitude that you're out there continuing to be curious and to explore some of these other technologies. You are also trained as a NAPRO practitioner, and you do a lot of restorative kind of lifestyle work, I imagine, in the meantime, in order to look upstream to figure out how did we get here in the first place. So, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think echoing on that, we leave residency and medical school with a lot of gaps. And over time, I've just tried to empower myself to learn how do we fill those gaps? How do we learn about someone's metabolism, learn about someone's hormones, and then optimize their nutrition, their gut, their glucose, their lifestyle
All
to
connected.
make them feel amazing every single day in a way that empowers them to manage their hormones on their own day in and day out.
Yeah, right on. Well, we're going to go through some case reports here, and maybe we'll actually start with that. Those, if you want
Yeah,
to bring
sure.
one of those up. But I'll add something in there, which is that I think, we talk about the menstrual cycle as an important vital sign for women. We don't have a lot of research that has looked at the implications of pharmaceuticals and whatnot based on where a woman is in her cycle, but partly because we don't teach women about their cycles to begin with. And I, as a young man, I was just told don't have sex or something terrible will happen. And my wife was in that same camp. And what this really boils down to is that when we have declining fertility rates and in large part just struggling to conceive naturally and carry a baby to term, there's also an invitation there to explore how the body is working as a whole, as opposed to just looking at the egg and sperm meeting. We know it's more complicated than that, but sometimes it's hard to put objectifiable metrics, so to speak, to this process for people. So what I think we're going to, hopefully pontificate on here is when you have any of these comorbidities, as we call them in medicine, or you've got, really, really horrible fatigue or abnormal periods or whatever, sometimes we're just like, well, go on the birth control pill or do XYZ, the 6 hacks to get pregnant. And that isn't going to be enough for most people. It might be enough for some people. But once you get to the point where you feel like you've tried everything, you can go to miracare.com. We'll have like a code for everybody to try this out in the podcast description. But when you're working with somebody like Rose and Sarah, Dr. Peterson, excuse me, you have this like opportunity to actually go a little bit deeper and just for even a short period of time understand that as you're going through these 4 phases of your cycle, menstrual, follicular, ovulation, luteal, that there's wild things happening. There's this incredible orchestra of sound. And if we're listening to the song, listening for the melody, we might actually be able to help you get down this path without going through the myriad of extra doctor visits and surgeries and everything else that may not have necessarily even help you. Really, we just needed to look at how your body's producing, metabolizing, and then utilizing hormones. So that's our introduction. Do one of you want to just present a case? And for those listening, we'll have this on YouTube for you to be able to watch along, and you can actually see what we're looking at in our client portals as doctors or practitioners, and then you can kind of relate this. So best to speak to the listener, but then we also will have some visual aids for those who want to come and check us out.
So one thing that I really do in my practice is I try to personalize my approach to your hormones, to where you are in your cycle, and to your metabolism. So I use Mira, which is a device that allows you to track your estrogen and your progesterone and your LH every single day to really map your hormones and get a sense of that. And then I often incorporate glucose monitoring so that we can get also a feel of, are you eating anything that's inflaming you? So I just put together a couple case studies that illustrates some of those, how that approach of trying to make it as specific as possible and really dig into some of those deeper details.
Great. Yeah, love it. Let's do it.
So this first case report is irregular cycles with intermittent spotting. And so I'll let Dr. Peterson take over kind of her background.
So this woman came to me and she was 32, and I specialize in hormones and fertility. So a lot of people come to me and they're trying to get pregnant, and she was having really irregular cycles lasting 50 days or longer. And she was having this intermittent spotting, and had been trying to get pregnant, but even more importantly, she wanted to balance her hormones and feel really good every day. And she came to me and she said, I've been diagnosed with high prolactin in the past and Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune thyroid disorder. So she was on a couple different supplements to try to make her cycles shorter, help balance her blood sugar with myo-inositol, for example. And then she was taking fish oil and vitamin D, and she said that she really never ovulated and that she had to have progesterone in order to regulate her cycles and have a period. And so there's a lot of red flags there. For example, why are her cycles so long? It's not normal that you're not ovulating. Where, if you have a history of high prolactin and Hashimoto's, something else is disrupted in your endocrine pathways. So definitely required a little bit deeper digging. So things that you think about when somebody has really long cycles are, do they have PCOS? Are their hormones really, really low and they have a low hormone profile? Why aren't they ovulating? Where is that problem with the follicular recruitment process? So I check something called an AMH, or an anti-Müllerian hormone. Usually you want that number to be around 1, 2, or 3. So it's a little bit elevated. It means that your body's trying a bit extra hard in order to ovulate. But her brain hormones, her LH and FSH, were pretty well balanced. But one thing that she was diagnosed with that no one had ever told her before is she has a really high hemoglobin A1C. So she basically has pre-diabetes in a young woman who is otherwise considered to be totally healthy. And her hormone profile at the beginning, like she's making enough estrogen, but we'll see later on, like she has a pretty low hormone profile in general. And so I think a lot of it is mitigated by this inflammation that she was having from her glucose. So she came to me and she was on a gluten-free diet because she'd been diagnosed with Hashimoto's before. She didn't really exercise. She had a lot of sleep issues, so she needed melatonin, and she was having tons of constipation, bloating, and gas. So one thing I do is I really pay attention to someone's gut and their gut symptoms, because your gut has a huge implications in how you absorb and process nutrients, which is essential to making hormones in proper amounts. So those are also red flags. Like, why is she constipated? She's probably not absorbing and processing the nutrients that it requires in order to make enough estrogen to ovulate.
Sarah, can I pause you real quick here? If you could just go back to that previous slide there. So the AMH, when I was in residency training, this was one of those things where I'm sitting in the REI docs. I'm like the resident that's just farting around in there, not really having any clue. I'm reading Spear Off. I'm reading all the textbooks.
Yes.
I remember reading that AMH, that it's going to downtrend throughout your whole life, and you really can't do much to change that needle. And then in my personal clinical practice, I've seen the opposite. Can you just reflect on that? Because I think everybody gets so worried about their AMH, not realizing that it's not like set in stone and it's not bound to go down. Can you just reflect on that a little bit and what you've learned in your practice? And you can disagree with me. I'm just,
I totally agree. You hear like, oh, there's nothing that you can do about it. So for one thing, AMH, I call it a Goldilocks number. Like in our fertility world and hormone world, you want to have everything in the middle, not too high, not too low. High is not always better. Some people get it back and it's really high and they say, oh, great, my egg quality is amazing. But actually, you don't want it to be too high. You want it to be around 1, 2, or 3. So if it's too high, then I worry where is that metabolic component? Why are we having insulin resistance? Why is your body having to recruit so many extra follicles every month? Because it's a reflection of how many follicles you have to recruit in order to get one dominant follicle.
interesting.
So,
Okay, I haven't heard it worded like that. I love that. Keep going. This is great.
because anti-Müllerian hormone's measuring the primordial follicles, so how many follicles you have in the chamber that are your body's getting ready to ovulate. And so a lot of times if we can fix their diet and their insulin resistance, we can bring that AMH
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned insulin resistance, A1C of 5.9. What I was trained to do is, hey, you don't act until they're at 6.5, which is our official diagnostic threshold. This is already for me, like, this is something we can get down. So when you're looking at these types of labs, do you start with an A1C? Is that like an easy, like low-hanging fruit, you think?
Yeah, I check it on everyone.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Great. Okay. All right, moving on. Sorry, I just want to make sure that like I get so many questions about these types of things that I want to make sure that we have somebody else who's poking around there. So go ahead.
I would just want to say too, sometimes people worry that their AMH is too low, and that's sometimes associated, do you have lower egg quality? But again, I think that the traditional teaching of, oh, there's nothing that you can do, your egg quality has been really challenged lately because we've made a lot of progress in helping inflammation, helping
Sure.
autoimmune diseases, helping reduce those free radicals, and really helping people not necessarily get their egg quality to be what they are in their 20s, but to really improve it more than we used to think you could.
Great. Great. Thank you.
So this just, Rose, do you want to orient people to a
Yeah, I
Mira
will.
chart?
So welcome to your first Mira chart. Along the top, you can see the index. But along the bottom, we pick up her chart already on cycle day 17. And you can see the date is under it. So this is her July 8th is where it picks up, July 8th on cycle day 17. The black lines are the urine metabolite of estrogen, or a reflection of the serum estradiol metabolized into E3G. And then the turquoise line is LH. And then the purple lines is the urine metabolite of progesterone as PDG. And then if someone's choosing to track their temperature, the BBT is tracked in this higher purple line here. So when we're looking at this chart, we really, again, can see a really good 3D view of everything that's happening. I'll give it back to you.
So one thing that's notable about this chart, when you have an LH surge, you really want to be having it between cycle day 12 and cycle day 16 because it's a sense of how much estrogen your body has to make in order to have a high quality ovulation. So you can see her LH surge is not until cycle day 41, and it's because she's not making enough estrogen. So black, your estradiol on a Mira chart, usually you want it to be going to above 200 by around that cycle day 12 to 14, and hers barely gets high up until cycle day 41. So definitely something there, like why is her estrogen so low? And then when her progesterone, that purple line is so high, that's because she started supplementing with progesterone in order to
Oh,
give herself a period because she hadn't had a period by cycle day 41.
so that flat line that we see is actually meaning she has actually more. It's above the assay that you guys use at Miracare. Like she's probably off the charts in progesterone. Is that right?
Yeah, so that then we know that she's supplementing, and that's how it will look when people are taking supplemental progesterone.
And just a
Okay.
quick note on that, it does depend on what type of supplemental progesterone as well. Sometimes people get confused by birth control progestin.
Mm.
It is progesterone, what the
Wait a
body's
second.
naturally making. I know.
You're telling me there's a difference between synthetic pseudo hormones and the real stuff? I don't believe it. Can you speak more to
Yes.
that?
Yes, so there is a lot of confusion around women think when they're taking birth control that they're taking what their body already makes, and that is not true. So they are not only synthetic, but they also work very differently. How the body responds to them responds very differently. And so truly supplementing a hormone such as progesterone, you have to take bioidentical progesterone, but it can be taken in multiple forms. So oral, vaginal, injectable. There's also topical progesterone. So understanding it from how our Mira chart interprets it is different, and providers should understand that as well. So I
Got
like
it.
to explain that anything that increases the serum level significantly will then be reflected on the Mira data. So that's a good summary of that.
And so this is pregnanediol. Is that what's actually being picked up in the urine?
Ooh, so it's a PDG, which I can find the technical term for you. But it is the
Okay.
breakdown of progesterone. And you're probably thinking of it from there are multiple pathways, alpha, beta. Um,
Uh-huh.
we do not do multiple pathways. We only do one
Okay.
of PDG.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And so if a person was taking birth control, let's say, and they did Miracare, are you going to have the same output on the Miracare progesterone tracking with the synthetic
No,
versus, okay, got it. So you wouldn't see this type of spike if they were
correct.
taking a progestin, but you would with it's almost like a way of testing whether or not you're on bioidentical.
Yeah, we actually sometimes people ask us, can I test while I'm on birth control? Well, there's limited functions with that. Like if you want to know on my IUD, on my birth control, on my implant, am I ovulating still? Yeah, we can help you identify that. And many people think, well, I'm not ovulating. Well, that's not entirely true. Many women, I
Yeah,
think the last study I looked at was women on an IUD after it had been in for 1 year. 80% of women were ovulating regularly again. So in the first year, many women are not, but after 1 year, many women do start ovulating again. So of
interesting.
course, the IUD is working in other ways to prevent pregnancy, but the actual ovulation process may be happening.
Okay, great. Well, final question before we go back
Yeah.
to Sarah. The basal body temperature, is this something that is tracked on the device itself, or is it with another device that interfaces with Mira? I honestly just don't know. I've sent these to people and I just don't know.
I can help answer that one. So,
Sure.
um, Mira does have a Bluetooth device. It's an oral thermometer that will then sync or via Bluetooth and get charted. But you can also manually take it. So if you're using an Oura ring or using a temp drop, you're using your own thermometer, you can manually chart it and have it be displayed as well. So it's pretty flexible there.
Cool. All right. As you were.
Anything else you want to talk about on this slide, Dr. Peterson,
No,
or
I
this
think
chart?
this is just a good baseline to show
Mhm.
this is where the patient kind of came to me.
Mhm. Okay.
And then, so basically, kind of what this is kind of zooming in on it. So, this is another cycle that she had. You can tell her LH surge is a little bit earlier. So, she had an LH surge on cycle day 19, which is a little bit later than I usually like to see, but you can tell still her estradiol or we kind of use those in terms interchangeably, sometimes estrogen and estradiol. But it's quite low, even when she has an earlier LH surge, her estrogen is not getting high enough, and it's also not initiating a progesterone rise. So even though she's having LH surges, she's not ovulating. So that's
Hmm.
another thing. Like we need to get her having regular cycles and need to get her ovulating regularly.
And just a quick couple of notes on this. When I'm looking at the E3G levels, the black lines, I'm always looking for that nice, big, robust rise towards the LH surge and still a second rise afterwards. And what's interesting in her case, she actually has better estrogen after her LH surge. So that is completely reversed of what we would like to see. So sometimes people focus in on just one area of estrogen, but it really should be looked at the entire cycle through. So there's a lot of different kind of moving parts and pieces. And you talked earlier about like harmony that might be happening. This is truly a harmonious song that your hormones are trying to do. And when you listen really close, you can see, unfortunately, a lot of dysfunction sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything normal about this chart, frankly. So,
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yes, yes.
So I often have people do continuous glucose monitoring because, and what it is it's something that you can either order online or I prescribe from a pharmacy. It's a little white disc that you wear on the back of your arm and it Bluetooths to your phone and it tells you what your glucose is continuously. Traditionally, it's associated with people who have diabetes. However, I use it a lot and it's being used a lot now just to really learn about your metabolism and your nutritional status. You never want your glucose to be too high or too low, and you really want to identify things that make your glucose spike. Because if your glucose is spiking, you're having an insulin spike, your body's retaining fat because it's in stress mode and it's very inflammatory. And also, this process is extremely personalized. I have some people who can eat one sweet potato and it spikes them through the roof on their glucose monitors. Other people can eat all the sweet potatoes in the world and it doesn't spike them at all. So it's really helpful to know exactly what spikes you and what doesn't, and be able to eat in a way where you have a straight line glucose curve all day long. So she had these big spikes, and going up to the 180s on your glucose is really, really high. You never ever want it to be above 140, and you want to have an average glucose of 100 or less. So that shows that she has some pretty significant insulin resistance. And I had her write down what she's eating, how it says turkey sandwich with an ancient grain bun. So then it enables her to figure out like what is it that's spiking her. Like she
Yeah.
probably can't do buns anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the CGM approach. It's way better than the finger sticks from a comfort level. It is a little bit pricier if your insurance won't pick it up, but it even for 3 months, it gives us a really good idea. At least it gives our clients a good idea as to what are they doing that's leading to these, tremendous spikes and prolonged spikes actually that we're the most concerned about. Yeah, that's great that you can actually have this data and start to correlate it with her clinical history along with the Miracare data.
Another thing that was kind of interesting about her, I really try to do this holistic approach because if she's having inflammation from glucose, then I ask her, okay, where else are you having inflammation, right? And she said, oh, well, I'm having, because she's already are having gut issues. So, okay, we need to address your gut. And she said, I get itchy all the time. So I said, okay, well, that's weird. Let's do some IgE testing. Because sometimes people have inflammation from multiple sources. So she ended up having this corn sensitivity and she eliminated corn. And she said, oh my gosh, Sarah, I feel so much better. I don't have this itching in my skin all the time. And then we did a gut health test and she had really bad digestion. She just really wasn't digesting and breaking down some of that protein and fat that she was eating. And she had a leaky gut. So I started her on some digestive enzymes and just things in her daily life to get her digesting food better and to fix that leaky gut. Also, I think sometimes too, we'll read things on Instagram or we'll hear a podcast and it'll say, oh, my friend, this worked for them. Like, I'm going to try that. But I always encourage patients to really personalize it to themselves. For example, sometimes being gluten-free is excellent and it's the right thing for you, and sometimes it's not. Because often I see people, sometimes they don't eat, if they're going gluten-free, they're not eating enough fiber and grains in order to support their natural estrogen production. So if gluten makes you feel horrible, by all means, you probably should be gluten-free. But if your body can tolerate gluten, having that nutrient diversity is really, really important for your hormone production. So I actually introduced gluten back because her thyroid hormones weren't very high. And then I just made her have a certain amount of protein every day, have some whole grains, have omega-rich 3 foods. She just wasn't nourishing her body in a way that was supporting her estrogen production, and she had way too much inflammation. So I originally had her on metformin just to really, really bring some of that down, but we eventually got her off that just with diet alone. So that was pretty neat.
Sarah, can you just comment real quickly on the DHEA supplementation and how that's so helpful for fertility? Because I will also say I think people are overutilizing DHEA in some
Mm.
regards. I have a low libido and they're suddenly slathering themselves with DHEA or taking it orally, and then they find that they develop acne and all this other stuff. But there is quite a bit of literature that supports this. Can you just explain for people that aren't familiar why the DHEA supports estradiol production? It's a kind of a softball question, but
I love it.
just
Yeah. DHEA is made by the adrenal glands, and estrogen comes from two places, one from your adrenal glands and amongst other things, and the other is a big your ovaries is also a big part of it. So just DHEA, just supporting your adrenal glands kind of helps support your body's natural production of estrogen, but it also supports your body's production of testosterone. So yeah, you have to be careful when you use it. You really want to be monitoring their estrogen and testosterone, and you also want to be monitoring their DHEA because you don't want to overshoot that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to use that with a bit of discretion and make sure that the dose is okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
there's
so
this
for
aromatization thing that happens in so many different tissues that
Mhm.
this is actually like the food, stoichiometric food in order to produce estradiol. So thank you for just commenting on that.
And so in her case, you were giving the DHEA intentionally to raise her estrogen since it had been historically so low.
Right, exactly. Yeah, just to help her body produce it in natural amounts. Because yes, we can give bioidentical estradiol, but at the end of the day, you have to support your body's natural
Yeah.
estrogen production.
Yeah, right, right. And I actually, as a small aside, so many people end up in the fertility specialist clinic without anybody actually looking at all of the upstream potential things that are going on. And then we know that IVF is an independent risk factor for so many things happening in pregnancy, when perhaps it wouldn't be as complicating if we would have addressed some of these upstream causes and the root cause of some of these dysfunctions. So,
Oh.
okay, go on. Sorry, I'll stop interrupting for a second.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. So once I had her start tracking her glucose, it was such a game changer because then she was empowered to know exactly what she was eating. So we brought down her inflammation with having her cut out corn, but we sometimes you have to be careful when you have somebody be restrictive. You have to make sure they're filling in other ways. Again, to support that nutritional diversity to help their hormone production. So just making sure she was eating like a lot of protein and other, B vitamins and other things to support her hormone production. And so you can see her LH surge went from 41 to 24. So that's a huge surge. And you can see her estrogen, you want it to be what I call a J curve. You want it to start out low and then start curving up and be high around the time of her LH surge. But the most important thing is that you can see that she has a progesterone rise. So within 3 to 5 days of an LH surge, you want to see their progesterone rise, ideally above 10. So as you watch that trend, she went from having an LH surge with no progesterone rise to an LH surge with a progesterone rise. So she was finally ovulating on her own, and we didn't even give her any ovulation medication or any
This looks
hormones or
exactly as
anything.
you would expect. Yeah, this looks great. This is textbook almost.
Yeah. So, and this is her third cycle. So this was in, one within one cycle of starting some of these changes.
Good job.
So one thing that was kind of nice is I repeated her TPO antibodies because you want to make sure if you introduce gluten that you're not making them worse and they're actually coming down. So a TPO antibody level of 19 is really, really good. That's really bringing down inflammation. And then her prolactin normalized, so she could come off cabergoline. So just monitoring some of those hormones and in your glucose and things that are inflaming you, it can really affect how your entire endocrine system functions. And really, the goal is to bring down your need for medications. And then we kind of talked about, she had this LH surge and she had a better estrogen surge and a post-peak progesterone rise. So she was finally ovulating. And this was her first cycle in years where she had a progesterone rise and she had a period without having to take progesterone.
Good job, Doc. So, do you want to, why don't you like summarize maybe just that experience so that we have something to contrast it with this next one. And we'll just do two cases and then I'll show you some charts from somebody else in my life who you can kind of pontificate on that. But maybe just in summary here, what was done, it was very minimally invasive and yeah, maybe just summarize this one real quick for us.
So this is a patient who came to me who was having really long cycles, wasn't ovulating at all, had a number of different areas in her life where she wasn't feeling good. So she was itching, she was having gut issues, she had been diagnosed, with these endocrine issues of Hashimoto's and prolactin, and she had been put on these medications. And people were telling her, oh, you just have to take progesterone every single day, every single cycle of your life in order to have periods, which is not really root cause approach, nor is it sustainable. And that also doesn't make you feel great. Like, yes, you should probably have a bleed every so often, but it's really not fixing the issues. So just doing a little bit deeper dive and mapping out her hormones, we figured out, okay, she's having really low estrogen. She's not ovulating. ovulating. And a lot of that's probably because she was having a lot of inflammation. She was having inflammation from corn, from her gut, from her glucose. She was diagnosed with pre-diabetes, and just making some of those minor diet changes to get her having bowel movements every day, get her glucose stabilized. She was able to produce hormones naturally on her own and even come off of her cabergoline and really improve her inflammation from her Hashimoto's.
Yeah, dope. Yeah, that's great. We've talked about progesterone quite a bit, so I think it's a good time before we get to the second case.
Mm.
Maybe we can talk about the napro technology a little bit. Um, my criticism of napro is that people are picking up on this chart from the Pope Paul IV Institute, and they're giving everybody progesterone.
Yes.
And I struggled to even find the original data until somebody who had the textbook scanned the chapter where they actually cover the original study, which was with like 108 or something participants. They were all women who were had been struggling, I think, on average for like 3 years to get pregnant. And then based on this upper and lower range of normal, let's just give you some progesterone. Oh, you're borderline normal. It's like borderline low fluid. Let's just do something. Can you just explain to me like how you see this since you're also trained in NAPRO and you're a board certified OBGYN and now you're a Miracare professional? How do you see this through the lens of NAPRO? And can you try to help me understand why people are starting to do progesterone supplementation for every single reason under the sun, even if it doesn't really fit that original data set?
Yeah, Dr. Hilger is out of Omaha was the one who kind of pioneered this. Okay, let's try some alternative approaches, which is,
Yeah.
a cool thing to do as far as like, okay, something that we're doing is not working. Like, let's try to do some deeper digging. So I think it is true that some people do have progesterone deficiencies, and my bioidentical micronized progesterone can be helpful. But I think what you have to be careful of is you really, really need to be looking at the big picture. And you
Yeah.
also can't forget about estrogen because you really need to pay attention to your estrogen to progesterone ratios, right? They
Right.
need to rise and fall together. They're best friends. So if you have low progesterone, but you also have low estrogen, you put someone on progesterone, now their estrogen is still low. You haven't
Right.
helped anything because you're not
Right.
paying attention to that ratio. So, and the other thing is you need to be careful that you need to still fix the underlying
That's
cause.
exactly
Because
it.
I really don't like when people come to me and they've been taking progesterone for years and years and years and years, and there's no plan to come off of it. There's no plan to heal. And so I use bioidentical hormones a lot. Like I use estrogen, I use progesterone, but with an end game in mind.
Right.
Like,
Right.
okay, this is your problem. These are our goals. We're going to do it for this much time. Then we're going to reassess and measure what we've done, see if we're meeting our goals. I don't like people to be on hormones forever.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I feel like every tool has a purpose, but we can't go around smashing everything with a hammer, hoping that the nail goes in. So that's all. I mean, I do think that a lot of women actually nowadays, sometimes we actually don't know what the reason was that they had what we call, I don't know if they still use this term, but luteal phase defect. I still use the term, where you
Mhm.
actually have an inadequate rise of progesterone due to potentially some dysfunction in the corpus luteum or the myriad of enzymes that lead to this production, this steep rise in progesterone. And we haven't fixed anything. We just pop you on progesterone. Nobody's ever asked, like, why was this deficient in the first place? And when we get that fixed, maybe you still need progesterone, but at least we've also addressed the upstream cause. So thank you for that. Do you guys want to do one more short one? Like now that we've kind of done the nuts and bolts, maybe we can go through a second one, and then I'll have some more questions after that, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
this one is amazing. It'll be the showstopper. So this patient had been trying to conceive for 2 years, and she came to Dr. Peterson with regular cycles. I'll let you take it away.
And a lot of people come to me because they've gone to other physicians and they've said, "Oh, everything's normal. My hormones are normal. Like, why can't I get pregnant?"
Oh,
This was a 37-year-old patient who'd never been pregnant before. She did have some anxiety. And she said, "Sarah, I'm super healthy. I'm vegan. I don't understand. I work out all the time. Like, I've been checked. Everything's coming back normal. Why am I not getting pregnant?" So we checked her blood work. Her anti-Müllerian hormone is in range at 2.5. So you think, okay, she has a good egg quality. Her FSH is a little bit elevated at 8. The higher your FSH is, it's the sense of how hard your brain has to work in order to produce estrogen and progesterone. So that's not totally within the realm of normal, just putting the whole picture in mind. And then her estrogen's normal and her thyroid is a little bit high. So sometimes people come and they say, oh, everyone said that my labs are normal, but when you do a little bit deeper digging, they're not totally normal.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe not normal for her.
And then so I said, okay, let's do Mira and see. And it was really interesting. Like she was
Whoa.
having that positive LH surge and this was literally the first day like that she
Mhm.
started doing Mira. She had
Now,
an LH
ovulation.
surge. But look how high her estrogen is. It's just through the roof and sky high, which is interesting because she has a normal body habitus and she's working out and eating healthy and all that. And so what the positive things from this, she's having LH surges on cycle day 14, and then she's having that progesterone rise, which you want to see so that we know that she is ovulating. However, her estrogen is extremely high, and then
Issue I
about
mentioned.
7 to 9 days post ovulation, she has a big drop in her hormones. So you say, okay, what's going on with your corpus luteum? Why isn't it able to sustain that hormone production here?
Hmm. Hmm.
So no one had ever tested a detailed test of her thyroid, and so she did have high antibodies, and so she was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And then I sometimes in people who are really anxious and they're like, how is my anxiety affecting my hormone levels? I always just test their cortisol so that they have some actionable data to know, okay, I'm feeling anxious. How is this affecting my body? And her cortisol levels were through the roof. And it just gives her kind of a heads up. Okay, I really do need to manage anxiety. This isn't just in my head. It's something that I actually need to work on along with the rest of my health. So having that data can be really helpful for patients. And then oftentimes when people have high estrogen, I see it's often diet mediated. They're eating something that's promoting this way too high production of estradiol. So I had her do glucose monitoring. And she found that because she was vegan, she was eating a ton of carbohydrates and a ton of sugar.
I bet.
And she came to me and she said, Sarah, I don't believe you. I said, okay, just do your Mira, do your glucose monitoring, just learn about your body and we'll see. And she came back and she said, oh my gosh, you were totally right. I thought I was eating so healthy. And it turns out all I was eating was like white bread and tofu, which is very inflammatory, was leading to really high estrogen levels. And she just wasn't eating enough protein. And it's okay if you're vegan, you just have to try a lot harder in order to get enough protein and really make sure that you're not eating things that increase your inflammation. Because like Skittles are vegan, right? Like you can eat some bad vegan food.
Sour Patch Kids. Yeah, all the favorites,
Yeah,
gummy
she
bears.
kept
Yeah.
eating white bread. So I had her do just more grains, more fiber. She was having tofu every single day. So soy sometimes. You just have to use it in moderation. Not that you can have no soy, you just don't want to have it every single day.
Hmm.
And then she could just target some of those foods that were causing spikes and then really manage her blood sugar better. And then DIM is a supplement that helps your body metabolize estrogen. So I started her on that just to see if we could metabolize some of her estrogen. And then in general, she started heart rate variability monitoring, which I use in people who have high cortisol because it gives them a sense of like, how stressed am I?
Mm.
And so she was able to and I added some adaptogens just because sometimes I like to try that before we add in anxiety or depression medications if it's the right patient, just to see if we can help them without having to do medications a little bit first. And then we really worked on her sleep and did some circadian rhythm type work.
So, Sarah, did when you see this, naturally that term estrogen dominance kind of starts to, play in where you don't even always get ovulation. So she's got all of that, but she's got sky high estrogen. Did she have any other symptoms or like maybe you can just talk about that? Like how might a person who's listening to this think like, oh, I am having regular predictable cycles, but maybe I have this estrogen dominance thing, and maybe we do need to work on the metabolism and detoxification of estrogen, just so that somebody might have some place to start.
So when we kind of the traditional thinking about estrogen dominance is you have like sometimes you can have a lot of PMS symptoms and have mood swings and especially right before you get your period and it can be associated with some cramps before you get your period and really heavy cycles. But also having really high estrogen can cause anxiety. So some people are like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so anxious. Is something wrong with me?" Or people will notice that around the time of ovulation, for example, they get a little bit more anxious because their estrogen is really high. So there are some more, or if your luteal phase is a little bit too long or a little bit too short, it can be a sign that your estrogen is high and then becoming low at some point. So those are a little bit more subtle things that can be associated with estrogen dominance or at high estrogen at some point in your cycle.
Cool. Thank you.
So this is literally 1 month later. So she said, Sarah, okay, fine. I believe you now. I'm going to change up my diet. And in 1 month, she radically transformed her hormones. She's now having an LH surge on cycle day 17. Her estrogen is no longer 600 all the time. I think around cycle day 10, I think that might have been an error of a reading. I know it looks a little
Yeah,
funky.
it's all funky, right? Progesterone's
Yes,
like sky
I
high
know.
too.
I tell patients too, like if it's not making sense, then it's probably wrong.
So you
Anomaly.
would
Yeah.
consider
Or
it
an
an outlier. Yeah. When we
Mhm.
see multiple, like estrogen and progesterone maxed out at the top of the scale, likely something went wrong with either how they tested, how they dipped it, how they put it in the machine, something went wrong. So we just consider
Yeah.
it an outlier and move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but that's this is what you want to see. You want to see your estrogen go from low to high in that J curve and be, somewhere above 200 around the time of her LH surge, around that cycle day, 14, 15, 16. And then you want to see your progesterone go up right away and then just go up, 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 and
Yeah.
continue to
Awesome.
rise.
So there must be some margin of error, right? Like we're giving the assay a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because you can see a lot of people that I've done this with, and I think I only have 4 people who are actually doing it in my dashboard, but I have other people who have sent me their Mira stuff, and I've just
Mhm.
had to look at it as a downloadable report. But um, they're like, well, why is my estrogen going up and down after the spike of LH? But there's going to be naturally some like margin of error there, right? Maybe Rose, maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to talk about that. Hormones are pulsatile, so
Yeah.
they do actually fluctuate. And then the urine metabolite, being a reflection over time, can show, I like to say sometimes it's stair stepping upward, like towards ovulation. You can see some up down. Patients shouldn't be concerned about that kind of zigzaggy pattern. But multiple lower levels can be clinically significant. So if you have, like earlier, we were looking at mid-luteal, then she had multiple low estrogen, multiple low progesterone. Then we're kind of like, what's going wrong here in this hormone production? So we're always looking for overall patterns and trends. And when we see multiple data points in a row that are kind of poor, then we start being more concerned.
Okay, one other question.
Mhm.
The idea, so it just occurred to me that when we were looking at her super high levels of estrogen,
Yeah.
we were all talking about the metabolism detox from those. But if she's not metabolizing it, why is she spitting it out in her urine? Like she's spitting it out, so the reflection of the urine metabolites is not like saying we have high serum estrogen levels. So she must be breaking it down. So would you ultimately then go back and say, well, if we're picking it up in the urine, it must be getting conjugated through phase one metabolism. Maybe she's just producing too much. Like where do your minds go whenever you see this in the urine breakdown?
So one thing that I always do, and I should have put her labs on here, but I always calibrate their Mira with their hormone, with their blood.
Okay. Okay.
Because exactly to your point, it is measuring a metabolite of estrogen in the urine. It's not measuring serum. So it is important to calibrate it because sometimes, for example, it'll look really low or really high on their Mira and actually be more normal in their blood. But then to your question, that's exactly true. You want to say, okay, why is it so high in the urine? Like, are they over metabolizing their estrogen?
Mhm.
Are they under metabolizing it? Like, why is there that
Right.
imbalance between
Yeah.
urine and blood?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, I guess having the blood values would allow us to pick this apart even further.
Yeah, so if you're looking for like metabolism pathway, then many providers do look at, I want some serum and urine metabolites. Of course, the benefit to the urine metabolites is you can do it now ongoing. So I've heard Dr.
Sure.
Peterson say it's kind of like calibration. You don't need
Mhm.
to do blood every cycle over and over again. You can use the mirror data then to do your ongoing assessment. Am I making the headway that I want? And in this patient, we go from this really high estrogen, which would be very interesting to see what her serum levels were. I have seen perimenopausal patients who have this high of estrogen and their blood was, in the 900s. So they definitely correlated and went together. So both the serum was very high and the urine metabolite. But it is kind of like for you as a provider, it's like a puzzle. You have to understand so many different pieces of information, but that's why both of you are providing such good care to your patients because we're not just taking one value snapshot in time and saying, "Oh, you're fine," or, assuming that they need one sort of a type of intervention.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that compliment, by the way. Nobody really compliments people like me and Sarah. We're out there suffering in silence. So,
Well, I
and
have to
getting good
say that
results.
I tell about both of your practices very often, and patients can tell when they go to your website, they can immediately tell this is different. This is not, you know, the experience they've already had where they got unfortunately dismissed or not listened to or, gaslighting, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Props to you too, Sarah, doctor.
So fun. I just love it. It's the best job in the world. So this is her second cycle after we started doing some of those things. And you can see that she's having an LH surge on cycle day 20 or 21. So and then her estrogen, it's still a little on the high side in the follicular phase, but overall, way, way better of a hormone profile than how we started. And then she has this beautiful progesterone rise right after ovulation. So that's a sign of a high quality ovulation. And then you see how it doesn't dip anymore, around that post peak, we call it peak as in your LH surge. So about 9 days after her LH surge, she was having those dips. So sometimes that's a sign of a poor corpus luteum, and then that can be a sign of a poor quality ovulation. So now she's not having those dips anymore. So then we say, okay, she's having a much, much higher quality ovulation, probably because we brought down some of that inflammation just from managing her Hashimoto's and making those dietary changes. And this is kind of fun on Mira when you become pregnant, the LH and HCG are so similar in your body that it'll show up as an LH rise. And so she got pregnant this cycle. And you can see as a practitioner, you always worry, to your point, Dr. Raleigh, do you have your low progesterone? Do you have low estrogen? How do we think about that? And especially with people who are trying to get pregnant, you definitely want their hormones to be high enough. But you can see she's making such excellent estrogen and progesterone in her luteal phase that it really gives you confidence that this is making enough to support the pregnancy. So it's kind of fun because you can see that her LH is going really high and then she got
Mhm.
pregnant. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's
So,
great. It's remarkable. I mean, now we can actually see it. Now, it doesn't mean you're guaranteed to have a baby and carry it to term and have a dream home birth or
Right,
whatever, but at
right.
least we're starting to uncover some of the things that might even lead to some of the pregnancy complications and
Mhm.
the sort of option limiting things that arise in our standard, fare, in the United States. Even when you think you're doing everything right, it's not totally clear what's going on and why you're not able to conceive until we look at this objectively. So, this is great.
Yeah, and this is a person who had seen multiple doctors. She said, I thought I was being so healthy because I was vegan and I was working out all the time. And people had just told her, oh, you have unexplained fertility. Everything looks normal. We don't know. And this was in literally 2 cycles of
Wow.
fixing some of her underlying issues. She didn't require a single medication. She didn't need any ovulation medication. She didn't, I mean, which I use sometimes, but this is a person who didn't even need any estrogen, progesterone, anything. She was just able to do it all on her own.
Yeah.
after having been trying to conceive for 2 years, which
Mhm.
I
I
know
think is
it's so
just
frustrating for people. Like they're not getting any answers. And then the best
Mhm.
that we as doctors can do is sometimes just be like, well, my colleague down the hallway can get you started in the IVF conversation. It's like, well,
Mhm.
that's very expensive. And it leads to sometimes even ethical dilemmas with frozen eggs and embryos. And I've seen it all now. So, Sarah, well, I have a question for both of you to comment on. I'll just start with that one because we're still looking at this chart. E3G estriol, I'm guessing is what that stands for. We know that that can become well, okay, so for context, there's three primary estrogens that we think about in women's health. There's estrone, which if I recall is predominantly like it's the most it figures the most in the menopausal space. And then we have estradiol, which is your reproductive years estrogen. And
Mhm.
estriol, which doesn't really have much import in our conversations except in pregnancy when the placenta is cranking it out. So why are we measuring estriol here and not estradiol? Because even when you show the labs, we're always talking about estradiol, estradiol. And when we're supplementing, we're talking about estradiol. Who cares about estriol? Why are we using that?
So the technical term is estrone 3-gluconide, but really it is the breakdown of estradiol. So this is when someone's talking about serum estradiol, and then the breakdown of that, we see it in the urine as the E3G. So standard practice for urine metabolites is E3G. Now you can measure more than just E3G, but we've chosen to do that one because it's the most useful data for us. And of course, we started as a fertility company, so those actively trying to conceive. Now we see it be our product being used for lots of different things now, but it's the breakdown of estradiol.
So it's E3 is estrone 3.
Yes,
So it's not estriol, it's estrone.
yes, which I know is
Oh, okay.
confusing.
I know they made it confusing because in
They made
medical
it
school we
super
learn
confusing.
E1,
This
E2,
whole time.
E3.
Yeah, I'm like,
Yes.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
3 estriol.
Why?
Okay, okay. That makes a little bit more sense. Thank you.
Yes,
But
yes.
why not just go for estradiol in the urine? Are you not able to detect that as easily?
So from my understanding, I'm not the researcher here, but it's not measured as estradiol. Estradiol is the form that's in the serum. So
I,
once it's metabolized, then we have to choose one of those three pathways. And again, we've chosen to do estradiol because it makes the most sense. That's the reflection of the reproductive hormones that mean the
yeah.
most in the fertility space.
Okay. That was a big question I had. So thank you. That literally, I almost like feel almost at ease now because I was like,
Ah.
I don't know how to explain this to my sister or whoever else. Sarah, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think estradiol is what is most helpful, at least in the space of recruiting follicles and paying attention to your hormone balance and things. But you also, um, need to take all those three pathways into consideration if the whole picture isn't making sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is lovely. All right, we're creeping up on an hour here, and I want to be respectful of both of your time. Most people have heard about Dutch. It's very, very expensive. You can get like a one shot to see all of these cool pathways we've been talking about, elaborated in some really neat graphics. You can also do the cycle mapping, which gives you one cycle's worth of progesterone metabolites and estrogen metabolites. Um, have you guys started working with Dutch at all? And I think I may have even tried to make a connection at some point, but have you guys considered what do you think the next evolution of this is? And what
Mm,
value would there be for us to be looking a little bit deeper in the way that Dutch does,
yeah,
but also giving the convenience of checking this at home? And maybe also, Rose, you can just take a moment to talk about what the actual collection looks like in case somebody's curious about doing
sure.
this for themselves.
Yeah, so the process of testing with Mira involves purchasing an analyzer and then one-time use wands that you dip into urine samples. The urine we like to use is first morning. That's industry standard. So like if you look up, if you're like to deep dive into the literature, look at a research study that has urine metabolites. The standard of
Oh,
care is first morning urine. So we use a first morning urine because it's naturally concentrated and easy habit forming. You dip that one-time use disposable wand into that urine for 20 seconds. You cap it, you put it in the machine, you walk away, it reads it. If you're choosing to use the free phone app, then you open that up and it Bluetooth syncs to the device and then graphs the data in this beautiful picture like we've been showing today. So it's a very easy to use. I've heard providers say that like this is, me walking alongside of you, almost like I'm in the bathroom with you, seeing your hormones each day. So there's really real-time data. It's really informative for both the patient and the provider. I myself, I've ashamed to say, but sometimes patients would say to me like, "Oh, I just had a 19-day cycle," and I'd be like, did they ovulate? What really just happened? Is this actually a period? Is this breakthrough bleeding? Like what just happened in this cycle? And when I see the data, then I can clearly say to them, you had an early LH surge, so that's why your cycle was so short. Or I do think this is breakthrough bleeding because you didn't ovulate. So just the clarity that provides me as a provider is something that has not been available until this point. Because to bring up Dutch cycle mapping, it's very useful data. But the disadvantage to it is it's one cycle, as you said, and it's a delayed response. You don't see the results until about 3 weeks later. So it's great for you to know that they had abnormal hormones last month, but what about this month?
Right.
So, like Sarah's example that she shared, this patient that had that really high estradiol, you might have missed that entire thing if you tested the, wrong cycle after you started interventions, things like that. So I've had so many providers say, I get this started immediately because then when you see them for even their first appointment, you already have usable data. You can already see abnormalities starting to creep up. You can already see, oh, okay, they at least had an ovulatory cycle. I can work with that data. So it is just so helpful for the providers to be able to see in real time.
Sarah, do you want to add anything to that? And I also would love for you to comment on, we were kind of waxing poetic about the beautiful beauty of doing surgical boards and sitting in front of a panel of experienced veteran OBGYNs. Had you been like, hey, well, I've been tracking their urine metabolites and I didn't see this adequate, surge, let alone what the consistency of the cervical mucus was, which I never really appreciated in residency. I don't know about you, but it was like, I mean,
Mhm.
you're also a woman. So for me, I was like, how did I not really know this until I like started learning about fertility awareness? So maybe you can just reflect on how this might be practical for OBGYNs or any practitioners working in this space to really appreciate what Miracare can do. And I'm not saying this to be promotional necessarily. I mean, like I only would have cared about this. I wouldn't have cared about this, let me say, if I hadn't had some like really good reason to do this. And now that I know about these different technologies, it changes everything. It's like a total game changer. So maybe we can just reflect on that in incorporating maybe even some experiences you've had with NAPRO or Dutch testing as like a kind of composite for couples out there who have been told they can't get pregnant, but maybe we just need more information.
Yeah, I think to speak to Dutch testing, when people bring me their Dutch cycle maps, it's lovely. It's just good data that I can use to kind of help them. I do tend to prefer Mira because of that fact they can do it for much longer and we can see over time. But all of these things can be helpful, right? Like more data can be helpful, and Dutch measures some of those when you do not the cycle mapping, but just kind of your regular Dutch testing. It does tell you about your hormone pathways. And so if you have issues, do we need to look into your gut? Do you need to look into your liver? So it can definitely give more information, especially when we're trying to do that deeper dive. But yeah, to your point, it's funny because when you reflect back in medicine, I always think, oh my gosh, we hardly even had any nutrition at all. We had no exercise science. We knew a ton about OChem and biochem and the chemistry of
Okay.
pharmaceuticals and things like that, and medicines have a lovely place and a lovely time, but we really need to get back to the roots of the basics, just eating and even supplements and nutrition and working out and how that can be personalized to your hormone profile. And yeah, some of these subtle signs of what are the subtle differences in your cervical mucus and the subtle differences in your period, and how can we use those to really see, okay, where are the problems? Where do we need to look into it? How do we form like a more comprehensive differential diagnosis in a way that also, I think, maybe I'm interested to hear what you think too. Sometimes I think in residency, we're just like bossing our patients around all the time, like, do this, take this, do this. But this is just flips that on its head. It just empowers women to take their health into their own hands. So they come to me and they say, Sarah, I think my progesterone's low, or like, I'm having horrible mood swings. And then they circle, this is where my hormones are crashing. And then that light bulb that goes on when they learn about their own bodies. And then they say, okay, I'm going to exercise less this month because I see that my hormones are really, really low. And they can just really use that information to make themselves feel excellent every single day is totally a game changer.
I couldn't agree more. And people will actually, if I don't use the right language, sometimes I'll actually get a lot of criticism as if I'm like blaming and shaming and guilting. It's like, no, guys, understanding this and teaching this is a means of empowering. I've got two little girls. I hope that they can appreciate just how beautiful and elegant these cycles, these feedback loops, and all of the stuff that's happening inside their bodies. I want them to appreciate just the glory of it, as opposed to like, hey, you need to just be on birth control because there's that thing like that may be an option for them. And to each their own. I hope that that's not something that they end up doing because I've seen it wreak havoc on people's health. But I also, would love for them to for them to appreciate that like, oh, something's not right here. Maybe this is an invitation to go a little bit deeper. And then hopefully they'll find somebody like you, Rose, or you, Sarah, and like find a practitioner that is like really um, welcoming in the opportunity to not only teach them, but like you said, Sarah, to like really empower them to understand their bodies. I feel like what you guys just did could be a replacement for everything we learned in health class in seventh grade. Like it would be, maybe it would be over our heads, but but it would have been nice to understand that there's a reason that my body's doing these things, especially as a young woman. So thank you guys for giving me an hour of your time today. Any final thoughts, or maybe Rose, you can just speak to, how people can get in touch if they have questions. We'll put the code in the
Mhm.
description. But yeah, any final thoughts from either of you? This has been a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, I'll let Dr. Peterson go first.
I would just encourage any, women that are listening or men or families, really listen to your body and use it as a guide because I think it's easy. In the past, we've just really normalized things that aren't really normal. Like, oh, you're just crabby because you're PMSing. Like, that's not normal to be having horrible
Mm,
mood symptoms. That's a sign of a hormonal imbalance. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be addressed. So, nobody can tell you that there's something that nobody can tell you, oh, you're normal, you're fine if you're not feeling normal and
mm,
fine.
That's right.
Like, you know your body better than anybody else. If there's something wrong, then we need to dig and we need to find it. So, please, 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 I always tell my patients, like, do not give up on your body.
mm.
Hmm.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Don't give up on your body. You are not broken. You just need help getting back to center.
Yes,
I love that.
Yes, this
yes,
is just the body that you have. We need to learn about it, love it, and nourish it. Don't stress about it. Don't give up on it.
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah.
And a piece of advice that I like to give is if you need to get a second, third, fourth, fifth, I don't care how many opinions you need to get. If you're not getting the care that you need and deserve, then you need to find someone who will listen to you and care for you in the way that's respected and the way that you deserve it. So I think between Sarah's message and mine, your audience is going to be well on their way to success here.
Yeah, and this is for men too. Like men, I
Oh,
can't
yes.
tell you how much I appreciate the women in my life now that
Mm,
not even from residency, actually what I learned after that that helped me put all these pieces together was like, holy smokes, anything that's going to disrupt your body's ability to do what it wants to do is probably not what I'm going to recommend as first line, despite what I
mm.
learned in all of my years of expensive training. So thank you guys. Thank you so much. We'll put all of your info in the podcast description. And for those listening, go ahead and check it out on YouTube because the graphics really help you
Yes.
appreciate what Miracare can do. Thank you so much to both of you. Have a good
Thank you
day.
so much, Dr. Riley. Honored to be a part of this.
Yes.
Likewise, Dr.
Thank you.
Peterson and Rose, thank you so much.
Yes. Bye-bye.